You followed every rule, worked hard, did everything right, and it still didn't work because the rules changed while you were still playing the game. That's not an accident, and it's not your fault. There are 3 reasons this happened, and once you see them, you won't be able to unsee them. If you were born between 1981 and 1996, you need to hear this. You're not behind. You're not failing. You're not the problem. You just followed a map that was already wrong when they handed it to you, and nobody told you. Let that land for a second. Because if you've spent the last 10 years quietly wondering why everything feels harder than it was supposed to, why you're more tired than your parents were at your age, more uncertain, further from the milestones you were promised, this video is going to give you something you've probably needed for a long time. Not sympathy, an explanation. And those are very different things. If this is already hitting somewhere deep, type yes in the comments. You'll see you're not alone. Picture this. It's a Saturday morning. You're 9 years old. Cartoons are running 4 hours straight. You've eaten a bowl of cereal the size of your head, and in about 20 minutes, you're going to disappear outside until the streetlights come on. No phone, no tracking, no way for your parents to reach you. Just a bike, a neighborhood, and an entire day to figure out on your own. You burned CDs for your friends. You waited by the house phone hoping they'd call. You had a paper route at 12, a babysitting job at 13, a fast food uniform at 16. You heard the dial-up screech every time you tried to get online, and waited anyway. You built things out of boredom. You sorted out your own fights. You learned early that the world didn't pause for you. That self-sufficiency is real. That muscle still works. Even now, even when everything feels uncertain, you find a way to keep going. That didn't come from nowhere. But then, quietly, the rules changed. And they changed while you were still becoming. But here's what makes this even harder. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in ways you couldn't see. Here's the first. You were raised on a promise that was already breaking when they made it. Your parents grew up in a different system: stable jobs, company loyalty, pensions, a house by 35. That world was already breaking when they told you to chase it. But they didn't know that. They were passing on the map that had worked for them, not realizing the terrain had already shifted underneath it. So you did what you were told. You went to college. Many of you took on serious debt at 18 years old for a credential you were assured was non-negotiable. You sent out the resumes. You showed up early and stayed late. You did everything right. And then 2008 happened. Everything stopped. Hiring froze. Opportunities disappeared. And you were just getting started. Economist Lisa Kahn's research on recession graduates found that entering the workforce during a downturn suppresses earnings for a decade or more, not temporarily, structurally. The peers who graduated 2 years earlier got different jobs, different trajectories, different financial starting points. The timing wasn't your fault, but it became your reality. You didn't miss your chance. Your timing was taken from you. Can you relate? Drop your graduation year in the comments. You'll see you're not alone. Here's the second hidden force. This is the part that quietly followed you into adulthood. You internalized the gap between who you were told to be and who the world actually had room for. Your generation was raised inside an extraordinary era of self-belief. You were told you were special, that you could be anything. Adults built an entire cultural scaffold around the idea that you were the protagonist of a story that would go well. And then you walked into a world that was completely indifferent to that narrative. That collision produced something specific, a generation-wide low-grade imposter syndrome, the quiet feeling that you're somehow failing at a life that was supposed to be easier than this, the constant comparison to peers who seem to be hitting milestones you're still chasing, the voice that says you should be further along by now. And this is where it starts to affect who you think you are. Psychologist Dweck's research shows that when you're raised to believe you're inherently special rather than capable of growth, struggle feels like evidence that you were wrong about yourself. Millions of millennials were raised on that first version, and many of you have been quietly arguing with that voice ever since, working harder, proving more, never quite feeling like enough despite everything in front of you. You weren't failing. You were measuring yourself against a story that was never real. Here's the third hidden force, and this is the one that almost never gets said out loud. Your generation grieved something it was never given permission to grieve. There's a specific kind of loss that comes from watching the milestones you organized your entire life around become structurally unavailable. Not delayed, not slightly out of reach, just gone. The house, the pension, the career that builds steadily upward, the retirement that actually arrives. These weren't just financial goals. They were the architecture of a certain kind of adulthood, a certain kind of knowing that you're okay. And watching that architecture become inaccessible, not because you failed, but because the system changed, produces grief, real grief, but grief that has no name in a culture, because the culture is still pretending the old story is intact. So instead of grieving, you adapted. You became extraordinarily good at building meaning inside uncertainty, at finding identity in values, in experiences, in community, in things a market correction couldn't take away. That didn't happen because your generation was idealistic. It happened because uncertainty was the only landscape you were given to build on. And you built anyway. You weren't behind. The future you were promised stopped existing. But here's the paradox, and this is the part I want you to sit with. Because you adopted, nobody had to change the conditions. Because you found meaning anyway, nobody had to address what was taken. Because you were resilient, resilience became the expectation rather than the exception. And in the accumulated weight of always adapting, always adjusting, always finding the way to make it work, a lot of you got very tired. Not lazy tired, not unmotivated tired, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. If that sentence just hit you somewhere specific, drop it in the comments, because you should know how many people watching this right now felt exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. There's a reason burnout became a millennial word before it became everyone's word. You weren't the first generation to work hard, but you may have been the first generation to work hard inside a system that had quietly stopped pretending to offer security in return. That trade, effort for stability, had been the implicit deal. Your generation discovered it had been canceled and kept working anyway. You didn't fail the system. You adapted to one that changed without telling you. You did everything right. You were just playing a game that had already changed. You followed the path changed. That's not failure. That's clarity. And once you see it, you stop blaming yourself for a game that was never fair. You learned to build inward, values, identity, meaning, connection, because the outward structures kept shifting beneath you. That's not failure. That's a different kind of architecture. It doesn't look like the brochure described, but it's real, and it's yours. If this gave language to something you've been carrying for years, subscribe and click the next video. It's the psychology of Zennials, the generation born just before you, who lived through the same rupture from a slightly different angle. If this one hit home, that one is the missing chapter.